Welcome, everybody. It's time for a mental session. That's mental. Yeah. We got some brand new material. I'm very excited to share. This is never before seen, as far as I'm aware, data to share with the fortunate Team 651 guys and gals. And let's see if we can bring some interesting enlightenment to the crowd's wisdom. Wabs, can you see my screen? Okay.
I can see your screen. Okay.
Lovely. Now, Wabs, do you know what an Aura ring is?
I know what an Aura ring is. I've many times I've debated with myself whether I should get hold of one of these, but I've settled for the Apple Watch in the midterm.
Fair enough. Aura ring, basically, for those who are unaware, Jack Stack has one, and he talked about it in one of his videos, actually, why you're not sleeping enough, I think, or something, which will be clipped and put on to the social media channel soon. But an Aura ring is basically just a kind of health tracker, if you like. There's Apple Watches, there's lots of other things. I would suggest for guys that are interested, it is probably worth getting something along those lines, something that tracks your sleep or your movement or your steps or some sort of health metric. I had never done anything, and this the first time I ever got one was May 29th, 2022, as you can see last year. And so happily had this thing, and it made me a bit more aware of my activity levels and sleep levels and the readiness score. And then about a week ago, I suddenly had a brainwave message Wubs, so I wouldn't forget, and I said, "Oh, Wubs, I'm going to track my readiness and sleep scores with my win rates in poker. Let's see if there's any correlation," because we all know, at least we know kind of anecdotally, sleep's important for our mental game, and readiness scores. Readiness, by the way, in an Aura ring is made up of the following attributes, if you like. So the body temperature, your sleep, HRV balances, heart rate variability, doesn't matter. Don't worry too much. This is just if you don't know what that is. Sleep balance, previous day activity, how active you are. Activity balance is like how active you are in the day. Resting heart rate, lower is typically better. Recovery index is just how well you recovered are in terms of your stuff you've done. But it gives you basically a nice kind of range of factors that it gives you a score from. And the readiness score is typically the higher the better. And sleep score higher the better. And the activity goal, this is a percentage number. It's just, so what percent of the activity did I make? Activity goal is the least reliable data here because this changes depending. So they set a lower, if I have a poor readiness score, my activity goal is lower. And the other thing to mention is, if I scroll quickly to the right to show you guys this to start with, you can see a very strong correlation with my sleep score and my readiness score, as we'd expect. However, a very poor correlation with my activity goal percentage, how active was I, and my readiness score, typically because the days I'm very active, I play football, I have to wake up early. Wubs, we talked about this the other week, didn't we? Where Saturday mornings, I say mornings, they're about 1 p.m. Yes. Early starts for the poker players amongst us. And therefore I sleep a lot fewer hours, and therefore my readiness score is pretty bad when I'm more active. And the days I don't have to go out for football, I'm less active, but my readiness score is better. So the activity goal is a little bit less reliable in terms of being representative of my health, let's say. But the readiness score is a really good reliability, followed by the sleep score. So I then had to try and figure out, well, what sort of metric can I use to try and compare this to when looking at win rates? And so a couple of different ideas in terms of how to sort of create the best representation of a methodology here to analyze the correlation. And I figured, well, I shouldn't just look at my overall numbers, because if I just look at all games, the problem is that EVBB, firstly, not chip EV. The reason being, big blind win rates are typically, over a small sample, more of an indicator than chip EV is, because if you're playing ultra games, for example, you can be 1 BB effective, and yet as a chip EV, you can be 400 chips deep in that spot. And if you jam Jack too often to jacks, you're going to have, 10% equity and lose 360 chips at hand, when actually in EVBB terms, you've lost 0.8 BB. So it's a more reliable indicator than chip EV. Does that make sense, Wubs? Why that would be?
Makes perfect sense. Just
good.
A lot of variance in those sort of
So we're trying our best
Short
to
stack moments.
lower the variance from that. The second thing I did was I tried to pick just the same game, because obviously my September to June games would have had some, primarily actually 500s, 250s and 500s, where obviously the win rate wouldn't be necessarily as high. And so I just picked 50s and 100s ultra games because they're the only game that I've played consistently throughout the year. So it should be the fairest representation that we could do. Went through it, pulled out my EVBB for the week, each of those for those games, 50s and 100s each week, and then also the amount of hands. And so we come up with this. This can obviously, you can initially do a graph from this. I will show you that, guys, in a second. I then did a second kind of refinement where took away the weeks where I played fewer than 2,500 hands, because not that relevant what my win rate is over 500 hands. Obviously, more relevant what my win rate is over 6,000 hands or 7,000 games or whatever. So eliminate some of the kind of noise from the small sample sizes. Again, I think it's fairly sensible. I then also tried to do a 3-week rolling average. So the 3-week rolling average, quite a good idea in terms of the usefulness of a rolling average, are useful in terms of removing some of the noise. You can identify trends a bit more indicator, because it sort of smooths out the kind of extremes that you can get rid of, and we can make a better kind of prediction about the future when we make some sort of rolling averages in terms of the trajectory that things lie. So basically grouped the last 3 weeks together, added all the hands together, came up with a kind of new EVBB score, averaged the readiness score and the sleep score and the activity score, and then we get a kind of 3-week rolling average with a bit more reliability in terms of the relationship between the readiness score and the EVBB 100. Does that make sense, Wubs?
It's a convoluted little process, but it makes sense.
Just to show everybody, show you're working. Some people may not be so interested in my Google spreadsheet methodology, but I, for one, found this was the funnest 2 hours I had this whole week. So I wanted to share the joy that I came up with. So on the left here, we can see this is ordered by the most amount of hands I played. This obviously will have, this is not perfect, but we can nonetheless see initially some of the results. So if we start here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. On the left, we have the weeks ordered in amount of hands played order. And from that, we can see the influence of my sleep score and my weekly readiness score. This is with everything. This is every week analyzed. And so initially, you can certainly see what looks like, okay, like a trend upwards, right? If I sleep badly, my win rate typically is slightly worse. And if my readiness score is bad, my win rates are typically worse. This is with every week without any kind of refinement yet in terms of the data. So some of these are on small samples, and so therefore it's a less reliable visualization of the data. Scrolling to the right, we can see a 2-week rolling average for the readiness score, where suddenly the data, I think, looks a lot more, you can see a trend identify a lot more with a lot more both reliability and also a lot more clear, the trend here, right? Where we see that from the readiness scores, the lower my 2-week readiness average score is, typically the lower my win rate, the higher are typically associated with higher win rates. It's what we'd expect to see, but it's still nonetheless, I think, really exciting to see that we can say, you know, my win rates are possibly double what they are on a good week to a bad week, or even triple or even more. We can't say with exact certainty, but certainly pretty significant. We did the same for a weekly sleep score. This is the weekly sleep score with the 2.5K hand history minimum sample of a week. And again, you see a pretty kind of nice trend of like poor sleep typically being associated with poor win rates. We scroll to the right, we can see the 3-week rolling average readiness score and the minimum 2.5K hand history. So again, this is every week, not with a rolling average, just the raw data. Eliminated the small samples, and again, we see a very clear trend, I think, in terms of if I have poor readiness levels based on all kinds of different metrics that make up the readiness score, my win rates are worse. When we look at a 3 rolling average, which is designed to help us identify the trends, again, it's a pretty clear trend. I think you can see here, Wubs. Now, it's not perfect. I will say that if we take, for example, some of the outliers, so this number here, this sample is based on my end of December sample, which was when I'd played almost 6,000 games in December, and so I was sleeping really well and I was pretty ready. But I think by then I was pretty fatigued in terms of like my brain was kind of done with poker. And there are also there are some times where like maybe I was less ready, but other things in my life I was less busy or whatever. Like it's not perfectly. There will be a kind of natural spectrum of weeks where it doesn't pitch perfectly. Not everything else is done as a kind of weighted to an average, so we can kind of give a true reflection. But nevertheless, if you kind of cut through a bit of the variability, I think we have established here a pretty thorough trend.
Yes.
For me at least, my readiness score really helping my win rate. And I think this is really interesting because if we were to, let's say, divide this in half and we say, well, do you want to take like the 79, right? Is my, let's say, halfway through. Do you want to take the below 79 group or the above 79 group? And that's very significant, right? If we were to do that, you'd say, well, your above 79 probably averages about 4 BB per 100, and your below 79 probably averages about 2 BB per 100, right? And so that is double the win rate from when I'm ready, and obviously more extreme if you were to take the 74 and below, or the 82 and above or something. 82 and above is looking more like 4.5, maybe. 74 and below is looking more like maybe 1.8 or something. And so I think we have really nice trends here. And the reason why I really like this is that we did a session 2 years ago talking about sleep and the importance of it. I've pulled that up so we can talk about it again. And at this point, I was just talking about general trends. I didn't have any extra data to give to us. And I think as poker players, we typically can be a little bit skeptical, I think in a good way, about people who will make grand claims. Oh, this will fix your poker game. Okay, well, will it? You know what I mean? Like, tell me, show me the data.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm aware, I don't think I've seen this data presented like this anywhere in the world ever. Have you seen anything like this?
Some pioneering shit, Tom.
Pioneering shit once again from your Team 601 coaching team. And I think it's really interesting. And so I'm going to keep doing this. But if anyone else has an Oura Ring or has any data, I would love to, by the way, send me a message, because I'd love to do one for them as well and make their respective graph and have a look and see how they look. Yeah, I think certainly we know that sleep's really important. We know that readiness is very important. And this, I think, finally sort of gives us some numbers to show the impact of that, perhaps. And I don't know, Wells, maybe you could talk a little bit about your experiences in terms of the times when you've grinded, when you feel well rested or well focused or in the zone kind of thing, and let's call it, versus times when you've felt you're grinding in a bit more of a fatigued state.
So a bit, more anecdotal from my point of view. But I will say the following: it's not just my poker that suffers when I don't sleep. So there's a little bit of a joke / not really joke in our household that I'm not particularly great company if I haven't slept especially well, which I'm not proud to admit. There's two things that take me out of my normal jolly sort of mood, which would be lack of sleep and hunger, right? The lack of sleep, definitely the worst. I noticed that there is a very direct relationship between anxiety and lack of sleep for me. So I've always wondered over the years what was the cause of my general sort of underlying anxiety that I've usually had, and I think sleep deprivation is the number one cause. Really,
really interesting you mentioned that. Sorry to interrupt, Woz, but I want to kind of pick up on that a little bit, because I do have a ChatGPT readout for what is the impact of sleep on emotions, which I did have a look earlier today. And one of the first things it says is that when you are sleep deprived, your brain's ability to regulate emotions become impaired, making you more reactive to stressful situations and more likely to experience negative emotions such as anger, irritability, and anxiety.
There you go.